Hey everybody, Jeff Schneider here. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about how to improvise and write melodies over modern chord progressions that don't follow your basic 2-5-1s, chord progressions that are just totally out there and obscure, and everything you play over them sounds just bizarre and it doesn't fit. So how do you navigate these more complex chord progressions? I wrote a chord progression for the purposes of this video. I made a backing track and I basically wrote a solo over it that demonstrates some of the techniques that I'm going to be talking about here. So I'm going to first play you the backing track so you can hear the chord progression, and then we'll look at the solo that I put together and we'll talk about all the techniques that I used. So let's have a listen. Okay, so that's the backing track. That's what it sounds like without any solo on top of it. So now I'm going to play the same backing track with the solo on top, and we'll follow along with the sheet music up on the screen. So let's roll that tape. So let's break it down. In terms of the chord progression, again, this is very non-diatonic, non-functional harmony here. I basically chose random roots and random qualities of chords and came up with this. So I don't think this is in any particular key either. I would just say it's in concert A major because that's the first chord. But besides that, it's really all over the place. To begin, the first phrase of the solo is this. Now that phrase in itself works really well over A major, but we haven't had to do anything odd there because it's only one chord. But before we go on, I just want to point out that there are two parts to that phrase. There's sort of the first part and then the second part. Now I point that out because we're going to be developing on each of those parts individually. So let's see what the next line does. Do you hear how that line relates to the previous line? If we just look at the very first part of each line, we have versus. So we've repeated that E in the first line, and then we've repeated that E flat in the second line. Also, there's some inherent voice leading there that we've done, meaning we start with this main target note as E to begin with, and then we resolve that E down to an E flat in the next phrase. And yes, there's a D in there, but that D is more of an auxiliary tone there that supports the E flat. The important thing is that we have this E with the A underneath it, and then the E resolves down to an E flat. So what's the takeaway there? Well, if you've ever heard of guide tone lines, which is a technique where you take sort of a long held note and have it voice lead through chord changes. So that might sound something like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Where you're really only playing maybe one, maybe two notes per chord, but usually just one, and you try to find a smooth connected line that goes through the chord changes, one that doesn't jump all over the place. That's a really good way to build phrases using a guide tone line. So first you have to find that guide tone line. There's not going to be just one, but see what you can do. See if you can hold out long whole notes or half notes and come up with a line that smoothly connects from one chord to the next. So the second part of these two lines is also connected. So again, for the first part we have, and then for the second line we have same shape and same rhythm. So the things that connect this solo together, what we're doing here is we're repeating different elements. We're repeating, in this case, the shape and the rhythm. So there's different things you can repeat. You can repeat pitch sets, you can repeat the shape of a line, you can repeat the rhythm of a line, the way you play the line, lots of different elements that you can carry over into your next phrase. But as long as you're repeating something, you're going to have some coherence. And that's what really makes a solo effective, especially when you have chord changes that are really disjunct. You need something to kind of bind everything together. And if it's just a bunch of random notes and you're playing sort of in A major 7 and then you're not thinking about A major 7 at all when you go to the F minor 7, meaning you have this sort of very vertical approach. You know, when you're in your own world on A major 7 and then as soon as you start thinking about F minor 7 sharp 11, you forgot what you just played. No, we want to do something that really is coherent and connects from one chord to the next, even though the chords are completely disjunct. So this is a way to do that. Repeat an element and you'll find that your phrases just, everything makes more sense. This still has something to do with what we've played before. If you notice, we have that very similar line to what we played before. So we're basically looking here for the different elements that I've repeated. When you're able to identify that sort of thing, you'll have a much easier time doing it for yourself. So when you're listening to solos and transcribing solos and learning melodies for that matter, look for the elements that are repeated. Again, pitches, shape of the line, the rhythm, the phrasing. There's going to be a lot of different things that can repeat, so keep an eye out for the different elements that are carried over. So in this case, we have at the beginning, then the second phrase, and then the third phrase. And then, of course, the end of the third phrase there, similar shape to what we've had previously, this line that moves in a downward motion. So the first three phrases. I feel like all three of those lines have something in common. And it does evolve over time. I like to compare it to the game Telephone. You know, when you whisper something into somebody's ear and then they whisper that phrase into the next person's ear, and then gradually that phrase that was originally said, it evolves over time. So there's something connecting it, but it does change. And that's a good example of what we have here. Something that's evolving over the course of three different phrases. Of course, in the next line on measure 4, let's just focus on that for a second. So we have a little bit of a repeated element here, the double A sharp, and then of course the downward direction of that line is carried over from what we had previously. I'm going to play all 4 phrases now just so we can kind of regroup. I mean, there really is a lot tying this together. The last 4 notes of that fourth phrase really call back to what we've had previously. I mean, it's really linked up and it works really well. The nice thing also that I've done here is that the phrase in measure 4, well, at least I think it's nice, but the phrase in measure 4 is really starting to push a little bit in terms of development. Like we are starting to expand what we've played. We have more notes now. There's more activity. So in terms of that telephone game where the line evolves over time, now we really are starting to change up a little bit, but there's still that essence holding it all together. And I think the last 4 notes of that really drive it home. Okay. Now in the next measure, things really start to change. We're going to change direction. And this has to do with that balance between expectation and surprise, which I talk about a lot, especially with my Skype students, where, you know, if you keep repeating yourself, you're going to set up an expectation, which is a good thing. You want to set up a pattern. But the great thing is when you break the pattern and you surprise somebody. The important thing to remember, though, of course, is you can't surprise anybody if you don't set them up to expect something. So you need to create a pattern in order to break one. That's an important thing to remember. And the way to create a pattern, of course, as I said, is to repeat yourself in some way. So in the D flat major 7 sharp 5 line here, we have changed things up. We've changed direction. So far, all the lines have been going down for the most part. Now we are going. And I think that even though we're going in a different direction, we're almost doing a mirror image or a reverse something or other of this four note phrase that we've done previously. This one that was like this, and then before that. Now we're going up. And these are lines that are based on somewhat of a pentatonic type of a scale, like, you know, that's very similar to like an F major pentatonic, and then if you add the D flat on top, that's kind of a nice scale there, a nice pentatonic scale. It's not your traditional pentatonic scale, but it is one that that pops up, especially for your major 7 flat sharp 5 chords. Now, I could keep talking about repetition all day, and I'm sure I'll come back to it at some point as we talk through the solo. But in this next phrase here, when I go into the F sharp minor 7, I do want to point something out that's a little bit different from what I've said, and this is the idea of finding a common tone between two very different chords. So D flat major 7 sharp 5 and F sharp minor 7, very different chords, but they do share an A, right? The A is the sharp 5 on the D flat major 7 sharp 5 chord, and the A is also the third on the F sharp minor 7 chord. So what I've done here is I've used that third as a way to connect those two disjunct chords. If you see on the first note of the F sharp minor 7, I have that A there, and it's a really smooth continuation of the line that I've played previously. Now something else happens next that's kind of interesting, and that is this line right here, B, G sharp, F sharp, and E. This is basically what I just played, but a half step lower. Remember I pointed out that pentatonic sort of scale thing that was happening here? That F, G, A, and C? Well, the next measure has the same thing down a half step. Now the note order is a little bit different, but the note set is the same. So listen for that. Listen for the... So here we go, from the D flat major 7 sharp 5, 1 and 2. Do you see that link there? F, G, A, and C, E, F sharp, G sharp, and B. We've just moved it down a half step. And then we finish the line out with some longer notes. Now, why do I say that? Well, because we have all this activity up front. We have this run of 16th notes from the D flat major 7 sharp 5, that measure 5 there. 16th notes going across 2 measures, and then finally we release into this 8th note phrase, which is a really nice opportunity to just, like, you know, let the air clear. And then, of course, we play the same line that we just did. That B, E, G sharp, and A. These are the same 4 notes that concluded the previous measure when we went to that E major 7 on beat 3 there. Now we're going up instead of down. Okay, and we're doing the same technique. In the C add 9, what is it? C add 9 sharp 11, G, F sharp, D, and A. It's the same thing down a whole step, right? So what's the takeaway there? Well, if you take, it's the same thing that we did in the previous measure where we had that the F, G, A, C, and the E, F sharp, G sharp, and B. We're taking what we played in one measure and transposed it directly so that it fits in the next chord. And the actual melody of the line is also continued, so I'll just play that. Well, it's a little bit different actually. So if we look at the end of measure 6, we have bum bum bum, and then in in the middle of measure 8, ba-da-dee-da. So the first time in the end of measure, 6, we have do-do-da. And then in the middle of measure 8, do-dee-da-da. So So it's almost like we've displaced that line there, but it's connected. And it doesn't repeat right after. It's not like dee-doo-da, dee-doo-da. It's not as verbatim as that. It's sort of, we kind of put it in there a bit more subtly. Do-dee-da-da. We've shifted it over, so it's repeated, but it's a little bit different. That's another takeaway right there. When you do repeat yourself, you don't have to always do it verbatim. You can change it just a little bit. Most people change things up too much, so you lose that element of repetition. It's important to just change it up a little bit if you want to at all. You also don't have to. You can very well just play the same thing over the course of a few different measures, and it'll still have the same effect. But if you want to add some changes in there, make them subtle. In this case, I just pushed everything over a little bit rhythmically. Okay. Okay, same thing. I mean, we took the same shape and the same set of intervals, and we made it work on F minor 7. It's the same arpeggio. There it is on the E major 7. There it is on the C add 9 over C add 9 sharp 11, and then F minor 7. We got the same thing. And then we go back up. I mean, how many times do I play it? I play it on the E major, I play it on the C chord, I play it on the F chord, and I play it on the A major. But it doesn't sound old, it doesn't sound stale, and that's because of those subtle changes and then all the stuff that kind of fills in the gaps. So I'll just play it from the F sharp minor 7. This is measure 6. 1, 2, 3. And all the while, I'm just kind of moving the rhythm. I'm shifting the starting point. Sometimes I'm starting a little bit later than usual. Sometimes I'm starting it a little bit earlier in the measure. So that's the element of surprise. There's the repetition, there's the expectation, but then there's the surprise, which is what goes against that expectation and makes things interesting. Okay, so that's about halfway through this solo. So I'm going to stop it there, and we'll do a part 2 where I analyze the second half, and I'll see you there. Thanks for watching, guys. By the way, if you want a copy of the sheet music for the solo and the backing track and the recording with the solo on it, I'm going to make all that available on my Patreon page, so I'll link that at the end of the video and in the description below. So thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.